on top of your iPad? On top of your iPad? A physical.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد سيد النبيين إمام المتقين الهادي إلى صراط مستقيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our sessions on Imam Shurubulani's Maraqi al-Falah, which is his own commentary on his comprehensive method Nur al-Idah, we have been taking a considerable amount of time in the opening chapters, partly because we want to set the way we go about understanding the text and its details and so on. And we will, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, be accelerating the pace. And we have, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reached the section on wudu and the rulings of wudu. And we began the section by looking at what's the meaning of wudu in the Arabic language and what is the fard. And we also, so we stopped there, right? And we touched briefly upon the fact that the author of the comment of the Hashia on Nur al-Idah, Imam al-Tahtawi, has a good breakdown here of the fard. Okay. This is a discussion that dips into usul, but has a lot of applications with respect to fiqh. So we're going to look at it. The discussion from Imam al-Tahtawi, right? So because we reached the Imam Shurubulani saying, "Arkan al-wudu'i arba'atun wa hiya fara'iduh." The integrals of wudu are 4, and they are its integrals. They are its obligations. Because sometimes you have derivative obligations. Right? So with the prayer, for example, the arkan of the prayer are how many?
4 or 5.
5. 4, correct? Or 6. القيام، القراءة، الركوع، السجود، القعود الأخير قدر التشهد. Although there's a minority opinion that it is a condition. وقيل الخروج بسنعه. Potential 6th is to exit the prayer with one's own action. Right? Does Imam Shurubullah include exiting the prayer of one's own action? In Nur al-Idah? He doesn't. He has a treatise discussing the Masail al-Ithnay Ashariya in his Rasail. That's separate. We'll come to it when we come to it. Anyways, but here, so sometimes you have an obligatory act, and there you have integral, and it has obligatory components that you could number separately. But here there are only 4 obligatory acts with respect to the prayer, the wudu. So Imam al-Tahtawi says, قَوْلُهُ هِيَ فَرَائِدُهُ. They are its obligations, he says. الْفَرْضُ قِسْمَانِ. The obligatory acts are of 2 types. قَطْعِيٌّ, right? وَظَنِّي, right? So the first kind is قطعي, decisive. وهو ما ثبت بدليل قطعي موجب للعلم البديهي. The decisive text is one that is established through a decisive form is that which is established through decisive evidence that entails intuitive knowledge. Right? It is clear and not open to interpretation. وَيَكْفُرُ جَاحِدُهُ. The one who denies the fard al-qat'i would be kafir because it's decisive. Of course, this is in a general sense, meaning يخشى عليه الكفر. It could be إذا تحققت الشروط وارتفعت الموانع. If the conditions of affirmation of kufr were fulfilled and any preventatives from the declaration of kufr were not found. Right? Because there are conditions that, above and beyond it just being decisively established. It needs to be معلوم من الدين بالضرورة, there's no shubha in it, etc., etc., etc. So that's the first level of text. The second is, the second type of fard is ظني, وهو ما ثبت بدليل قطعي لكن فيه شبهة ويسمى عملية. Okay? So the fard itself, you have a full fard and then you have a fard that is established. There's a fard ظني وهو ما ثبت بدليل قطعي. It's something established with a text that is قطعي لكن فيه شبهة, but there is an element of non-decisiveness. Shubha here is not a doubt, or it's a doubt, but in the sense of there's an element of non-decisiveness in it. So it's by a near decisive text. So it's decisive, but not quite. Right? ويسمى عمليا أي ويسمى هذا الفرض فرضا عمليا. يسمى هذا الفرض فرضا عمليا. So this is, ويسمى هذا الفرض فرضا عمليا. This is called an effective fard. Okay? So in terms of action, if you don't do it, your action is not valid. But in terms of belief, because of the shubha, you would not be deemed kafir if you don't do it. But it would be corruption. So that's why it says, وهو أي الفرض العملي ما يفوت الجواز بفواته. The fard عملي, the effective fard, is one which if omitted, permissibility, الجواز here بمعنى الصحة, validity is lifted if it's absent. This is a fard al-amali. It is established with a text, open to interpretation, with that almost decisive, but it has an element of being open to interpretation. So if missed, it lifts validity. وحكمه كالأول. In ruling, it is like the first, meaning the fard al-qat'i. غير أنه لا يكفر جاحده. But the one who denies it is not kafir. Rather, هو آثم وقد يضلل. Rather, أو يفسر. But the person is sinful, and it could be corruption or misguidance, depending on the gravity of what's being denied. Right? So he gives an example. فإن نظر فيه إلى أصل الغسل والمسح كان من الأول، وإن نظر إلى التقدير كان من الثاني. So for example, if you look at the washing, like what needs to be washed, right? So in ghusl, what needs to be washed? Okay. The command to wash is decisive. فَالطَّهَرُ. But the mouth and nose entering into washing the whole body, we'll say it's fard. Okay. The Hanafi say it is clearly established. It's fard. But is it open to the to interpretive possibility? And we say, no, we don't accept it. We say it's decisive. But if you sort of take, you go like in court, right, it's not something you'd admit in front of the judge and the public. But if you go, to the back and say, look, are you going to say the Shafi'i ghusl is not valid? No, of course I'd say it's valid. Right? So we say no, we don't admit to it being non-decisive. We hold it to be decisive, but we would admit ultimately that there is a shubha. Right? We don't say it is a non-decisive text. We affirm it's decisive, but we would admit that there is a shubha there. So this applies to washing mouth and nose in ghusl, and so this is إلى أصل الغسل يعني في غسل الفم والأنف. So in washing mouth and nose في الغسل والمسح. And the مسح, what مسح is يعني ايه التقدير بالربع. That's stating that it is a quarter. But even in the Hanafi school, there's multiple opinions on how much you wipe of the head. The relied upon position is a ruba, but from the early Hanafis, there's also a ruba, a nasiya, the forelock, ثلاث أصابع, 3 fingers, and then there's ثلاث أصابع مع أدنى مرور, right? 3 fingers, with at least the slightest of movement. So there's a number of opinions. You can see them in any mid-sized work. So then we say no. It's decisive regarding a quarter or thereabouts. But is there a shubha? Yes, because the ba does admit these other possibilities. Okay? But in our madhab, if someone wiped only a little bit of the head, we would say, well, in our school, your wudu is not valid. So he tells us, we're continuing to look at Tahtawi, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأَدِلَّةَ أَرْبَعَةُ أَنْوَاعٍ. Know that evidences, adilla, and a dalil, okay? Generally a dalil is that which guides to, that which is sought. Legally, a dalil is that which establishes a ruling. That which establishes a ruling. Now, what establishes a ruling, this goes into usul, but a text itself is not a dalil. Right? So you have a ruling, right? Wiping, like we'll see, how much do you wipe of the head?
Minimally
A quarter of the head. What's our dalil? We would quote, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. The Shafi'i say you can wipe even the minimum extent, even 1 hair. What's your dalil? وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. The Imam Malik says, wipe the whole head. What's your dalil? وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. So the dalil, right, is because the text is not pointing itself to the conclusion. If it did, then everyone would be going to the same conclusion, right? The dalil, this is the text, but it's the text and the understanding of that text that leads to the affirmed conclusion. Right? That together is the dalil. Right? It's the evidentiary basis, Quran, Sunnah, or the, analogy or whatever. But this is the text. But how does the text get you to the conclusion? And that's called istidlal, right? The way of coming from text to the conclusion. Now, how do you come from text to conclusion? It requires usul, principles. Those principles of going from text to ruling those principles are the principles of usul al-fiqh. The derivation of rulings from the primary texts, this is the Quranic term from this, one of the Quranic terms used is istinbat. It's legal derivation. الذين يستنبطونه منهم. Right? منهم. Yeah, الذين يستنبطونه منهم. Right? Those who derive the rulings from amongst them. Right? And the root of is the art of taking water out from a well. Because it can be tricky. You have a deep well, how do you get water out of it, right? And that's also ijtihad. So in reality, who derives rulings from primary texts? A mujtahid. Everyone else derives rulings from the derivations of the mujtahid. Okay? And so that would take us to, that's usul al-fiqh. So knowledge of usul al-fiqh does not make anyone a mujtahid. You just know those principles. But the ability to look at the principles, to look at the primary the sources of law and these principles, and then to be able to apply them towards conclusions, that is the role of the mujtahid. And a madhab is a coherent set of interpretive principles. And the application, and then the founder's application of those principles in a coherent, consistent manner. Right? So anyways, so al-adilla arba'atu anwa'. Right? قطعي الثبوت والدلالة. Something that is decisive in its affirmation and its indication. Right? So, كالآيات القرآنية, like Quranic verses, والأحاديث المتواترة, and mass transmitted hadiths, الصريحة, that are explicit, التي لا تحتمل التأويل من وجه, that are not open to تأويل here meaning interpretation in any way, من وجه أي من وجه صحيح. So decisive. So there's texts have two elements: al-thubut wa dilala, how they've come to us and what they indicate. And both can be qat'i or dhanni. So four possibilities. So first is qat'i al-thubut wa dilala. The mutawatir, you can find definitions of it. The mutawatir is a narration that has been relayed, that a narration of something tangible. That is narrated by so many people at every stage of narration that it could not be, that what they're narrating could not be untrue. And they could not have colluded on error. Because a facile refutation of tawatur, of mass transmission, you could say, that Hindus have been worshipping millions of idols for thousands of years. Isn't that mutawatir? Said no. But it's not. وَمُسْتَنَدُهُ إِلَى الْحِسِّ. It goes back to something tangible. Okay? So say that belief in Allah is mutawatir. It needs there's a way of arguing it gymnastically, but you can't claim tawatur for something like that. Although some would argue it, that Sayyidina Adam and Sayyidina Hawa, but that's far-fetched. Because otherwise you could say, all kinds of things are mutawatir. So there's conditions for tawatur, something being mass transmitted. And usually when they talk about mass transmission, they talk about hadith of the Prophet الثاني قطعي الثبوت وظني الدلالة. Something that is decisively established, but non-decisive in its indication. كالآيات والأحاديث المؤولة, such as Quranic verses and hadiths that are open to interpretation. Right? Al-ahadith here is referring to al-mutawatir. Right? Like Quranic verses and mutawatir hadith that are open to interpretation. Okay. Like for example, ثلاثة قروء. Well, not really. It's khas. But something where the Hanafis deemed it wajib, right? وظني الثبوت قطعي الدلالة. The third, something that is non-decisive in its being affirmed, قطعي الدلالة, but decisive in its indication. كالأخبار الآحاد الصريحة, such as individual narrations that are explicit in their meaning. الرابع ظني الثبوت والدلالة, something that is non-decisive both in its establishment and indication. معا كأخبار الآحاد المحتملة المعاني, so individual narrations that are probabilistic in meaning. Right? So الأول يفيد القطع. So the first type, قطعي الثبوت والدلالة, affirms something that is decisive. الثاني يفيد الظن. الثالث يفيد الواجب والمكروه تحريما. والرابع يفيد السنية والاستحباب. Right? Now, sometimes fard can be used to refer to both the fard al-qat'i and the fard al-amali. Right? Sometimes the ulama say wajib, but they mean fard. Right? And these are interpretive, these are possibilities of usage, right? And then he also tells us that the fard can be fard ayn and fard kifaya, right? And we won't unpack that too much. We'll be touching upon that in the Tariqa Muhammadiyya class on Fridays. That comes up reasonably early. And so we'll look at that there. Those who want to read it, it's there in Tawi. Anyways, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. So from that, the ulama deduced what the obligatory acts are. In our madhab, the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beginning by saying, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, when you stand to pray, I mean when you wish to stand to pray, then do this. Okay? It's as if you wish to pray and you wish to be able to pray, do these things. do these things. What's entailed by that, in the way the Hanafis understand it, is that if you did these things that are described, then you have fulfilled the purification related conditions for prayer. And how many things are specified there? 4 that are mentioned in the verse. فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ, wash your faces. وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, your arms to the elbows. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, and wipe your heads in this way. Wipe your heads with your hands. وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, and wash your feet to the ankles. 4 things are mentioned. The most controversial things that are not mentioned there are, number 1, intention. Number 2, order. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just told, if you want to do this, do these things. Right? And they're put they're put next to each other with a waw. Al-waw li mutlaq al-jam'. Of course, there's a tricky part. What happens to a set of waws after a fa? And that's a difference in lexical understanding between Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shaykh. Imam Shaykh argued, that's all, and that's a matter of lexical understanding. Of understanding of the language. فَاغْسِلُوا, and then. So when then comes, and then there's a series of wows, does the order enter between the things after? Because the fa does indicate order. But Abu Hanifa said no. So order is not understood. Intention is not mentioned. And the implication, if you do this, it is enough. Here it's where the levels of texts are important. This verse is قطعي الثبوت والدلالة. It's decisive in its indication. What do you have to tell us that intention is required in wudu? Right? What can you present as evidence? Now Shafi could say the hadith of intention. إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Doesn't work. Because as important as the hadith is, firstly the hadith is ظني ثبوت. It is related non-decisively. It's min al-ahad. It's related by Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. It became mashhur, became widespread after. But the beginning of its transmission is ahad, it's singular narration. But that doesn't work in terms of thubut, but also doesn't work in terms of dilala, indication. Why? Because إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Is this a full statement? But with the outward wording? If you take out إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ is the mubtada. Where's the khabar? And if you ignore the lesser way, say, well, the jar majroor is the khabar, it's not, it's shibh jumla, whatever, no. The jar majroor is muta'allaq bi what? بمحذوف. إنما الأعمال something بالنيات. What بالنية? That's why you need usul al-fiqh. You know, like they say, sometimes when people say something strange, you know, in Syria, they are على كيفك. It is whatever you want it to be, right? Like on what's your basis? So you have al-a'mal something بالنيات. Right? How do you make taqdeer? How do you consider something to be implicit? That's one issue. There's other issues too. Which a'mal are we talking about? Are all actions by intentions? Because amal relates to all actions, that anything that occurs as an action. Does that include? So amal first are اضطرارية and اختيارية. There's non-willful actions and willful actions. Do you intend for your kidneys to be kidneying? Whatever kidneys do. I don't even know what my kidneys do, let alone intend it. You intend for your liver to be functioning right now? No. Right? So these are a'mal. But there's other things that happen. You intend to take step after step, consciously. So there's also what is meant by in al-a'mal. Right? So that's an issue that requires some consideration. But the most obvious, so we could dispute what is meant, which a'mal. Because the is it for the whole category? Absolutely all actions, but we can poke a number of things at it. Non-willful actions, non-conscious actions, etc. are by their intention. Have you ever found yourself humming a song? Or just find yourself saying, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدُ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ? Did you make a conscious intention and then say it? Right? So, al-a'mal, actions, there's questions on what kind of is this and what actions are meant by it. That's an element of non-decisiveness. We could fight that over. But the other component is what is implicit and how do we deal with texts that have something implicit. And that's very common in Arabic. Taqdeer. Loads of examples elsewhere about taqdeer. And this is one of the important aspects of understanding a lot of differences between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is particularly. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, لا نكاح إلا بولي. There's no nikah without a wali. The Hanafis would be like, okay, next proof. Why? Because, okay, once you calm down from getting emotional, that la nikah, la is nafiya, what is being negated? La nikah, nikah, the la is nafiya, the nikah here is ism of la. What is being said, what is being negated about the nikah? It's implicit. You may think it's la nikah sahih, but it could be la nikah kamil. There's no valid nikah. There will also be no complete nikah. Similarly, la salata li jari al-masjid illa fil masjid. There's no prayer for the one who lives next to the mosque except in the mosque. Does this relate to validity? La imana liman la amanata lah. There's no iman in one who does not have amana, who cannot be trusted. Is everyone who cannot be trusted a kafir? Right? La, again, la imana, la of negation, iman. But what is being negated? It's implicit. Right? The khabar there is implicit. How do we determine what is implicit? What are the principles of that? So there's an angle of language and an angle of reason entering upon this. One from the usage of the Arabs, but secondly from the established rational principles of our religion, that according to Abu Hanifa, التقدير من باب الضرورة. When you have to specify something, this is a type of necessity. والضرورة تقدر بقدرها. And necessity is restricted to the extent of the necessity. Okay? So if you have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, actions are by their intentions. You could say actions are valid by their intentions, or actions are rewarded by their intentions. What is the lesser affirmation? Validity or reward? Reward. We're saying they're not even valid without intention is a bigger statement. So the hadith of intention doesn't help us over here. Or it doesn't help. Now, of course, there's a more fundamental argument, which is on usul. Imam al-Shaykh does not distinguish between a qat'i and a dhanni text, right? In terms of evidentiary basis. We've been commanded to follow Allah, we've been commanded to follow the Messenger of Allah. What has come from the Messenger? فَخُذُوهُ, take it. And that's a source of discussion in usul al-fiqh. And one of the reasons why is distinction between the qat'i and dhanni. Is it like 21 and a half or more? This seems to look fuller. Anyway. So this is a part of the argument, right? Then also, a'mal are of two types. There's a'mal maqsuda and there's wasa'il. There's actions that are sought in themselves, and then there's others that are means. Amongst the wasa'il are conditions. When you stood to pray Dhuhr today, did you intend that you are wearing clothes? Did you intend that the time was in? Did you intend that you did not have najasa on you? Did you intend that I did not make wudu? That I did make wudu, right? So, look across the chapters of fiqh. Imam Hanifa said that wudu, though an act of worship, is just a wasila, is a means to prayer. It's not an act of worship in itself, right? It's a shart. As the Prophet said, وَمِفْتَاحُهَا الصَّلَاةِ, its key is the prayer. You need the key to open the door, but to the house, but the key is not the point, right? Now let's say if Zayn moved into his own flat, so you say, so how's the house? Say, I have the key now. So what would you ask him? How's the house? Have you gone inside? Say, no, but I have the key. Right? Is the key the point? You need the key, but is the key the point? No. Right? Imagine if Zayn never enters the house. So what happened to enter the house? I have the key. Right? We'd have to sit him down and take some deep breaths. Right? Why did you get the key? And you had to coach him to go to the house. Right? Similarly, wudu, though an act of worship, is a means to prayer. إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, if you stand to pray. That's the point. So he said, الْعِبْرَةُ فِي الشُّرُوطِ. This is an important thing, right? الْعِبْرَةُ في الشروط حصولها لا تحصيلها. What counts in conditions, you can say في الشروط والوسائل, in conditions and also in means, fulfilling them, not seeking them. Just as you have to intend that I don't have najasa on me. You have to intend that I have wudu. You have to intend that I'm not naked. No. You just have to, the conditions have to be met, not sought. Like if two older people met and there's people around, yeah, let's say that, you know, we're both older, their parents have passed away, they're both converts, etc. So, you know, Bilal says to Jane, I marry you. She says, I accept. There's witnesses around. Do you have to intend the witnesses? No. Witnesses have to be present. That's it. Right? And there's many other examples. So this is a little of the building blocks of the Hanafi reasoning. It's important, of course, to keep in mind, to apply these principles, that hadiths are often quoted. Sometimes they're quoted out of convenience. So hadith of intention, as great as it is, as a prophetic teaching on having intention, it's actually not the asl لِلُزُومِ النِّيَّةِ. It's not the basis for the requiring of intention. What is the asl for niyyah in the Hanafis, according to the Hanafis?
For wudu.
No, in general. Like when the things that require intention, where do we get the ishtirat of niyyah from? There's many decisive texts. Right? Amongst them, explicitly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is affirming in Surah Al-Bayyinah, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They've not been commanded except that they worship Allah, لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهِ, which is موافقة فعل المأمور أمر الآمر. Right? It's for the action of the one commanded to correspond to the command of the one commanded. Right? مخلصين له الدين, making their religion sincere unto Him. What is the vessel? What is the vessel of sincerity? Intention. Right? Allah. And there's many other Quranic texts related to intention, right? مخلصين له الدين, many different places in the Quran, in different ways. That's a nuance to be aware of. Of course, many of the great the Hanafis throughout history have been very busy with fiqh. They had a lot of fiqh to do. Right? So, and it's not only that, if you look at, there's one of the larger compendiums of known manuscripts in the Muslim world, the section on fiqh, different researchers have it's between 55 and 60% of the manuscripts in the Muslim world related to fiqh are Hanafi. Right? Spend a lot of time focused on fiqh. And that is one of the four methods. Right? This also includes the small groups who follow other ways here and there, literalists and so on. Anyways, but with respect to hadith commentaries, it is useful to keep in mind that a lot of the hadith commentaries were written by the Shaykhites. So when you're looking for matters of method with respect to hadith, you have to keep that in mind. That one needs to be aware what are the Hanafi commentaries. And of course, one should be benefiting from the Shafi'i commentaries, the great ulama in that. Sometimes for convenience, the Hanafis will be quoting the Shafi'is on a point, because the Shafi'is spend a lot of time on hadith for reasons. But there's great works of Hanafi hadith commentary at a separate occasion. We'll discuss some of those. But that's important, but particularly on matters of method like this. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background related to this divine command. وهي فرائضها الأول منها غسل الوجه, right? Washing the face, right? لقوله تعالى, because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirming فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, then wash your faces. Now, here, there's isnad of ghasl to the face. Right? Ghasl is a known word in Arabic. Right? It's a lafz khas. Its meaning is clearly known. It's ascribed to a specific matter, which is wujuhakum. Faghsilu wujuhakum, your faces. Right? So here, the wajh here in the verse is ma'rifa or nakira? Ma'rifa, because of the idafa, right? Your faces, which is meaning the face that is yours, the face, right? So it's akin to saying, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ فَاغْسِلُوا الْوَجْهِ, right? Wash the face, right? And so that entails ghasl has a known meaning till 10, which is, if you say I washed the table, but you only did half of it, would that be considered washing the table? No. That ghasl, certainly in classical Arabic, means تعميم الماء, تعميم المحل بالماء, is مع الإسالة. Ghasl conveys the meaning of washing, entails that water reaches the whole area with the meaning of flowing. So ghasl has the meaning of ta'meem and the meaning of isala. Washing, that it's complete and that there's flowing. It flows. Two central meanings there. And al-wajh, right? The face. So ghasl, you have to wash completely the face. The face has known boundaries. Which boundaries? The face is that which the Arabs considered the face, basically. Right? And that's part of the precision of the Arabic language. Right? So here, from the Arabic language, any speaker of the Arabic language would understand that the command with respect to washing the face is that one wash the entire face. Right? So al-isti'abu shartun fi jami'i ma umira bi ghaslihi. Right? And this is understood. That arises from appreciating both the root meanings of the words and how, just even isnad works in Arabic. The musnad ilayhi. The ruling of ghasl has been ascribed to the entirety of the face. And given the meaning of ghasl and ascribing to the entirety, the whole, all, لا بد من استيعاب الغسل لجميع مسمى الوجه. One must comprehensively wash all that which is called the face. الغسل بفتح الغين مصدر غسلته. غسل is the مصدر وبالضم غسل الاسم. وبالكسر ما يغسل به. الغسل is what you wash with, but that's hardly used. من صابون ونحوه. والغسل, now what is غسل? What is the meaning of غسل? Is إسالة الماء على المحل بحيث يتقاطع. Is to make water flow over the area such that it drips. Right? Now, what is the least that is considered dripping? He says, وَأَقَلُّهُ قَطْرَتَانْ عَلَى الْأَصَحِ. The least of it is 2 drops. Because less than that, it goes back to what would someone call ghusl? What would someone, the least that someone would call ghusl? Okay? So the soundest opinion is 2 drops, right? And others said even 1 drop is sufficient. Okay? But this is taqdeer of the idea of ghusl. Now, and then he says, وَلَا تَكْفِي الْإِسَالَةِ بِدُونِ التَّقَاطُعِ. It's not sufficient to make it flow without there being dripping. Okay? So الغسل, right? في اللغة السيلان, right? الغسل is سيلان الماء, right? والوجه ما يواجه به الإنسان. The face is what a person faces others with. So it's the front of your head, right? And he gives its definitions, right? And it's that which is visible if someone stands face to face with you. That part is the face. And the face is everything that would decisively be considered from the face and not be considered other than the face, right? So it excludes the chin, the ears, the forehead, the side of the head, right? وحده الجملة الوجه طولا من مبدأ سطح الجبهة. Its limits of the face in length are from the beginning of the top of the forehead, سواء كان به شعر أم لا, whether one has hair or not. Right? So the bald people, etc. Okay? And whether one's hairline is regular or receding or descending. Some people have, if someone has a lower headline, then they don't do it from their hairline, they do it from the top of the forehead. Right? من مبدأ سطح الجبهة, from the top of the forehead, regardless of where their hairline is or isn't. Now, what is the forehead? Right? الجبهة. والجبهة ما اكتنفته الجبينان. The forehead is that which is encompassed by the 2 temples. Right? Because beyond the temple, the head now starts, the forehead starts now going side. So where the temple finishes, that's where the jabha finishes. Right? إلى أسفل الذقن. Right? To the bottom of the chin. وهي مجمع لحييه. And it is a meeting point of one's 2 jawbones. واللحى manbatul lihya, and the jawbone is where the beard grows. فوق عظم الأسنان, above the bone from which the teeth protrude. لمن ليست له لحية, for one who does not have a beard. كثيفة, for one who does not have a thick beard. وفي حقه إلى ما لاقى البشرة من الوجه, and with respect to the one who has a beard, to that which to that part of the beard that is in contact with the skin within the limits of the face. Now, of course, is a tricky thing in the Arabic language that the laha are the two jawbones, but the lihya in the Arabic language is the hair that grows عند ملتقى اللحيين. The beard itself in classical Arabic is this part. Right? Is that which grows عند ملتقى اللحيين. And in classical Arabic, these are called the aridan. And these are the two arids, the two sides. So the lihya itself is what grows from here. The sides are the aridan, and the حكمهما حكم اللحية من حيث الأمر بوجوده. Okay? The command to have a beard includes both the lihya and the aridain. And we're not discussing related things to that. وحده أي الوجه, and the limits عرضا, sideways, بفتح العين مقابل الطول. عرض, width is the opposite of length. ما بين شحمتي الأذنين, between the شحمتي الأذنين. What's شحمة الأذنين? They'll tell us. الشحمة معلق القرط. The شحمة الأذنين, the ear lobes, is where what's it called? Where earrings are hung from. والأذن, and the ear, بضمتين, you say أذن, وتخفف. تخفف, it's lightened, so you say أذن. وتثقل, and it can be heavy. ويدخل في and then now there's a conceptual issue, and this is a bit of takalluf, and don't get waswas from it, that how do you wash the face, only the face and nothing but the face, without inevitably washing a little beyond it? Because if you have a limit, imagine if we put a circle around the carpet. Don't you dare. Put a circle around the carpet. Okay? So okay, wash what is within the circle. What do we do with the marker? Because if you want to wash the entire area, then if you don't wash the limit, then inevitably you'll miss something that enters within. But if you wash the limit, you've washed beyond what is commanded. Of course, this is a theoretical discussion, right? And there's a lot of discussion on that. And some of the fuqaha talk about, what if you put wax all around the limit of your head? Right? Like what? So what really does need to be washed? Because people will get waswasa. So he says, وَيَدْخُلُ فِي الْغَايَتَيْنِ جُزْءٌ مِّنْهُمَا. A portion of the limit enters upon the ruling of washing. لِاتصَالِ بِهِ الْفَرْض, because the obligation has been connected to them. And this is not absolutely required. This is, Imam Tahtawi says, this is only mentioned because in order to wash the area completely, you almost inevitably need to hit the limit, even if it's slightly. Because if you don't make sure you hit the limit, then you may well fall short and it would affect validity. So it's not a requirement, but it's a practical, it's an inevitable practical caution. He mentions this. Now, very interestingly, a scholar with as much breadth of knowledge of the Hanafi school as Imam al-Tahtawi mentioned something very interesting, because they mentioned lengthwise from top of forehead to the bottom of the chin, from ear to ear. Now what's the problem? What about these sides? What's the limit of these sides? So we know top of forehead, forehead enters, ear enters. So how do you go from the edges of the forehead down to your ear? What enters? One thing is, the face is what's considered face. But how much of the side of the head do you have to do? Practically, we don't. Have you ever thought about this? That's fine. Have you thought about this?
The forehead?
No, the side. Like where do you stop on the side? Right? So, and it's good. So Imam al-Tahtawi says, وَلَمْ يَذْكُرْ فِيمَا رَأَيْتْ حُكْمَ الشَّعْرِ الَّذِي بَيْنَ الْأُذُنِ وَالنَّزْعَةِ. Right, so this area, right, like this beginning hair over here, right, is it part of the head or is it part of the side of the head? The Hanafis didn't talk about it. But conceptually, if you made a line from there down to here, right, can we use someone as an experiment? Like okay, each of us just do this. Okay? From the tips of your forehead, if you go in a straight line down to the top of your ear, are you going to touch some hair? So a little of the hair on the side should safely be considered from your face. That's a practical. Right? And the fuqaha don't specify this because inevitably, if you wash your face, right, from the tip of your forehead and you go down to your ear, you're going to touch it. Right? So it's nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. But you just take care of that. Right? So what you shouldn't do is just go forehead down and then up, because you may be risking the sides a little bit. But it's not defined, so مبناه على التوسع. There is some expansiveness. Now, so that's the side. This is mentioned by Tahtawi. It's quite a useful thing. And he actually ends up quoting the Shafi'is on this. The Tahtawi does. And then returning to Shurungulari rahimahullah, he says, وَالْبَيَاضُ الَّذِي بَيْنَ الْعِذَارِ وَالْأُذُنِ. The bayad, the clear area between the idar, which is the sideburns, and the ears. Right? The part that doesn't have hair. Right? يُفْتَرَضُ غَسْلُهُ فِي الصَّحِيحِ. It is obligatory to wash. This is part of the face. Even though you have hair growing there, till the ear, it's face. فِي الصَّحِيحِ. This is the sound opinion. وعن أبي يوسف and it's related from Abu Yusuf, سقوطه بنبات اللحية, that once the beard grows, that which is beyond the beard does not have to be washed. This is not the relied upon position of the school, and it's a narration from him. When they say عند, it means according to. That's عند يعبر عن مذهب الشخص غالبا. It's used for a person's position. عن typically refers to a narration from. سقوطه بنبات اللحية, that it's lifted by the growing of the beard. And there is argument as to whether this is actually is madhab or not, but it is an opinion that does exist. And so it's a weak opinion. You cannot act upon it. But here I just put a note. I more than once saw Shaykh Adib Kallas point to this opinion, this position, the weak, to lift to lift making up missed prayers. And so someone said they're short. They used to deliberately only wash till their beard and deliberately used to leave this out. When it comes to qada, Shaykh Adib used to point to this opinion that you could take this for isqat al-qada. And asked him about it. He said that these kinds of opinions he took from his mashayikh, that they can be taken for isqat al-qada and the principles of fatwa in our madhab. But we have to confirm. You can't just say, okay, I'll take that weak opinion for this, and you start giving people weak opinions. Someone who does that, it's the duty of the qadi or the grand mufti to warn the person, then threaten the person, then to have them banned or imprisoned. Because إفساد دين الناس أشد من سرقة أموالهم. And because corrupting people's religion is far worse than stealing their wealth. It's their deen that they take into their graves, not their wealth. Someone steals their money, it's bad and there's serious punishment. But robbing people of their religious practice is very, very serious. So, anyways, so that is the washing the face. So this bayad has to be washed. والركن الثاني, the second integral, غسل يديه مع مرفقيه, washing one's arms with the elbows. And he chooses ma'a here for the purpose of clarification. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the verse uses ila, to. Right? And he says مع مرفقيه, with both elbows. أحد المرفقين غسل. Now, this is very interesting. And this is part of the purpose of the Maraqi, right? It's sort of supposed to get you ready to read the bigger books of fiqh, but they go into legal reasoning and stuff. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse, that's why knowledge of Arabic is so important. فَاغْسِلُوا أَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. But marafiq, now there's a plural. You wash your elbows. So how many elbows? You wash your arms to the elbows. You all wash your arms to the elbows. Okay? So the jump, what it comes down to is أحد المرفقين. One elbow غسله فرض بعبارة النص. What? For each person to wash, one elbow is established by the expression of the text. Why? Because of a principle of the Arabic language. لأن مقابلة الجمع بالجمع تقتضي مقابلة الفرد بالفرد. Because a plural facing a plural entails that a singular would face a singular. All of you wash your elbows, your arms to your elbows. In Arabic usage, it would go down to each person wash one arm to one elbow. That would be entailed by عبارة النص. والمرفق الثاني, and washing to the second elbow, the second arm to the second elbow, بدلالته, by the indication of the text. Because you're commanded to wash one, the other one is understood because both arms share the same meaning. They're both arms. One is established by the عبارة of the nas, the second by its dilala. لتساويهما, because they're the same. And also للإجماع, because there's consensus regarding it, right? There's consensus regarding it. If there was any ishkal about it, the bayan of the Prophet is clear. You have to wash both arms. So it's not, and dilalat al-nas is a meaning that's understood from the text by anyone who understands the language of the text without requiring interpretation. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says regarding one's parents, don't say uff to them, that's the expression of that. فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا uff. It's understood بِدِلَالَةِ النَّص, don't hit them. Don't say uff to them. It'd be understood, don't curse them. I didn't say uff. I just said go to bad places in the hereafter. Okay? Was that uff? No. The expression was don't say uff, but it's understood anybody who hears it. If someone came up to you and they saw them curse their parents, what do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just said don't say uff. Anyone who hears it say don't say uff would understand, because don't say uff meaning don't say words that are disrespectful. So other words of disrespect fall under it, and like words are actions of disrespect. That's dilalat al-nas. Some of the literalists negate dilalat al-nas. So for example, the Prophet said, لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم. That none of you urinate in still water. Ibn Hazm said, who's a literalist, rahimahullah, a great imam, but he was a literalist. He said, if someone urinated in a container and emptied it in the water would not be najis. And it would be permissible. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ only said, don't urinate in the water. If you urinate outside, and poured it. But we say yes, the ibarat in this is not to urinate in the water, but to take a bucket of urine, put it in the water, it's the same in meaning. Because why don't you urinate in the water? What's the meaning that anybody who hears and understands it, don't render the water najis. Correct? He also said, there's nothing in this text prohibiting defecating in the water. But this is unsound understanding. It's not even legal interpretation. It's just textual understanding. Right? Right? So, imagine if Zayn lent you his tent. You have a tent? You do?
My dad is.
Okay. Let's say your father gave you your tent. You're going to go camping. He says, keep the tent clean. But it got really dirty. It's like you just burn it. Right? So where's the tent? He said, I burned it. When he said keep it clean, the ibarah, the expression of the text is keep it clean. What's understood from it is take care of it. Right? So dilalatan, burning it, is understood a fortiori. Don't do things like that, right? So anyways, so he brings in some of these concepts here and there in the commentary to train us to learn these principles as we go through. But pay attention. So, and if you just want to make a list here, there are 4 levels of dilala, of indication, right? And these are dilala lughawiyya. These are what's understood from just the language, right? So there is dilalatul nas, there is ibaratul nas, the expression of the text, which is the primary meaning understood by the text, from the text, by anyone who hears it, the expression of the text, ibaratul nas, right? Okay. The second type of indication is called dilalatul nas, right? Which is a meaning that is understood from the meaning of the text by anyone who knows the language without having to engage in legal deduction. Right? But the indication, the dilalatul nas, relates to what the text indicates itself. Right? Like the case of don't say oof to them. What do you understand from that? Don't be disrespectful to your parents in word and by extension by actions. So don't say oof to them, you go slap them. I didn't say oof. It's understood. Anybody would understand that. It doesn't work. Right? So if someone says, you tell your son, don't steal from your friend, so you get your friends to steal from them. Understood. So that's ibaratul nas and dilalatul nas. The third level of indication is isharatul nas. Right? The ishara. Right? Dilala is the indication of the text. The third is isharatul nas, the allusion of the text, which is a meaning understood from the text clearly, but that's not the primary, but that's not directly related, that's not the primary purpose of the text. So for example, the hadith about not urinating in water, we understand from that the importance of being careful about the purity of water. Concern for other people. Not wasting the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are meanings that are understood from the text, but the text is not directly talking about it. But it's clearly understood. Right? There's many such meanings that are understood indirectly, right, of the text. For example, the hadith Jibreel. They say that Jibreel, he's just The hadith is talking about how Jibreel came. But the way he sat, it's understood from that many of the adab of seeking knowledge. بإشارة النص. The text is not talking about that. Okay? The text relates to, but from that, meanings are understood. And the fourth is, اقتضاء النص is something that is necessarily implicit in the text. And when we come to that, we'll discuss that further. So, okay. And he says, وهو بكسر الميم مرفق وفتح الفاء وقلبه لغة. And reversing these is one language. Right? 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 ملتقى عظم العضد والذراع. It's a meeting point of the bone of your upper arm and your forearm. The meeting bone, right? And there you have to just be careful. Where the two bones meet, there are three parts. You have to do the whole area. To do a little extra, because the elbow is this point here, but it's also these two side bones. Okay? So don't just get to the bone itself, get the other two bones. Like there's protruder and two side things. Get all of that done. Okay? So you do a little bit extra just to be careful, right? Because you get the elbow itself and the side bones. You do a little bit extra just to be careful. وَالثَّالِثُ غَسْلُ رِجْلَيْهِ. And the third is to wash one's feet. وَالرُّكْنُ الثَّالِثُ غَسْلُ رِجْلَيْهِ. To wash one's feet. لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, because of Allah's word, وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, and your feet. From Surah. وَلِقَوْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ بَعْدَمَا غَسَلَ رِجْلَيْهِ, because the Prophet said after washing his feet, هَذَا وُضُوءٌ لَا يَقْبَلُ اللَّهُ الصَّلَاةَ إِلَّا بِهِ. This is a wudu that Allah does not accept the prayer with less than this. مَعَ كَعْبَيْهِ, with one's ankles. Now there's a tricky issue, which is that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran has been revealed both. Some of the qira'at say, وَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, which is the qira'ah of Hafs. Right? But within the mutawatir qira'at, it's also come وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ, and your feet. Now, that would appear to indicate that you wipe your heads and your feet. Now, there's a few issues, and which is what our Shia brethren state. But this is a rejected opinion within Ahl Sunnah. One, because the qira'at have to be understood together. Because these are subtle variants from the same revelation. So one simple way is that if there's ijmal in it, then do we wash the feet or do we wipe them? The Sunnah makes clear that you must wash. That's one way of understanding it. The other is that the command is to wash, right? And the qira'ah of jar, the other qira'ah is for mujawara, right? And this is a type of thing that the Arabs would do, that because the thing before it was in jar, so this is also in jar, ظاهرا ومحلها النصب, but grammatically it's a nasb. وقراءة جر للمجاورة. The qira'ah of jar is because it's next to it. And the grammarians, the Basrans, generally really didn't like this idea of Jabr al-Mujawara being recognized, but the Kufans did. Imam al-Zamakhshari has a beautiful discussion in his Kashaf regarding the wisdom of why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention the washing of the feet in this way after wiping of the head. One is pointing to the general order, but the other meaning is because what is the part of wudu where you're most likely to waste water? It's washing the feet. Okay? So he says what's understood rhetorically from the Arabic is understood is wash اغسلوا أرجلكم غسلا خفيفا شبيها بالمسح أي وابتعدوا عن الإسراف. Then wash your feet, but with a washing that is not far removed from the wiping of your heads, such that you remain far from wasting water. Right? But there is clear ijma' amongst Ahl Sunnah, whichever of the ways you reason it, whether from the indication of the verse itself, considering that there is no way you can consider the qira'ah of arjulakum, which is clearly that you must wash it, and in that case the other qira'ah of arjulikum would be to pointing to wash, but lightly. Right? And that would be Jabr al-Mujawara, or that there's ijma', there's two qira'at, but the bayan is made by the sunnah, and there's no instance of the Prophet wiping. Also, and one of the indicators, as Zamakhshari and others mentioned, that you must wash is the basis of washing is that it's ascribed to the whole limb. The basis of wiping is that it is partitive. But here, the action is ascribed to the entirety of the foot, so it would entail that you wash. So either way, but there's clear ijma'. It's not like someone said, I just wipe my feet, and there's no indication in this on مع كعبيه, with one's ankles, right? لدخول الغاية في المغية, because the end point enters in the limit. والكعبان هما العظمان المرتفعان. The كعب is the bone that is raised في جانبي القدم, on both sides of the foot. واشتقاقه من الارتفاع. كعب is from that which is raised. From that you have the Kaaba, which is the raised house. كالكعبة, like the Kaaba. والكاعب, okay, كواعب التراب, what's it?
كواعب أترابة.
كواعب التراب is used to describe the maidens. الكاعب هي التي بدا ثديها, is the one whose breast has become manifest. Right? ارتفع. So that is, we'll talk a little bit about the ankles and the elbows and ankles entering into wudu next class, and we'll continue from wiping a quarter of the head, but there's some discussion regarding that highlights some points of usul as well. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. So we'll stop here for today.